Welcome to Health Stealth Radio, where we move away from the mundane to gather insights from the shadows of enterprise and patient cybersecurity. Yes, we surely believe that traditional themes like endpoint software and zero trust are critical, but given massive advances in AI, remote and wearable device hacking, and data hostage negotiators, there's a much darker side to cybersecurity, and not everyone is quite willing to talk about it in public. Health Stealth Radio will thrive on these topics and encourage fireside spats to debate them. Here's your host, Frank Cutitta.
I'd like to welcome my audience tonight on Health Stealth Radio. For this interview, I'm honored by having Benoit Desjardins, who is it's almost impossible to describe Benoit's background because I thought I had sort of a professional ADHD. But Benoit is just, he's the Renaissance man, and he has so many interests, two or three of them happening to be things that we cover on this radio program. The one being cybersecurity, obviously, and the others being artificial intelligence, and I'm sure he could go on about patient experience as well, considering he's a physician. So I'll let him introduce himself. I thought this was a great compliment. If you're following Health Stealth Radio, you'll know that the last episode that we just had was in a data hostage negotiator. So I've got the guys that are trying to get the money back and deal with the ransomware, and then I have a guy here who has a background on the white hat hacking side. So Benoit, could you do an introduction and tell me a little bit about your time at Penn Medicine and some of the things you were doing professionally and recently until moving up to Montreal and including Montreal?
First, let me thank you very much for inviting me today at your show. It's a pleasure to be here. So, I used to be at Penn Medicine until very recently. I moved to Montreal 2 months ago. At Penn Medicine, I had a triple role. My first role was being an Ivy League academic radiologist. That's a doctor who interprets medical images. I was specializing in cardiovascular imaging, mostly cardiac CT and cardiac MRI. I was also co-leader of our NIH-funded research lab. We were doing cutting-edge research on myocardial fibrosis and arrhythmia, as well as a bunch of other closely related topics. So I was doing clinical work, teaching, and research, which is a typical triple mission of any academic physician. This is my first area of expertise. My second role was being an expert in artificial intelligence, which was the topic of my PhD from the 1990s. This was well before AI became really sexy, and I mostly applied it to medical imaging. My third role was being an expert in cybersecurity and a white hat hacker. So I was, for example, helping to train the latest recruits of the Penn Medicine cybersecurity team by participating in bi-weekly hacking exercises, guiding them on how to solve hacking problems. I also published research on cybersecurity of medical imaging. I was, and still am, leading the cybersecurity course at the Radiological Society of North America, which is the largest radiology society in the world. And I've started my 2-year term on the cybersecurity committee of the HIMSS Medical Society, which is like the most prestigious academic cybersecurity committee in the country. I was also an ad hoc consultant for the FBI, and I won several hacking competitions, including the annual Codebreaker Challenge from the National Security Agency. I used to tell people that I was an Ivy League university professor and radiologist by day and a hacker by night. I relocated to Montreal in April. Here, I'm working pretty much in the same three fields of medical imaging, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity, but the medical clinical workload is 4 times less insane than in the US. It gives me more time to do AI and cybersecurity stuff.
It's sort of counterintuitive. I don't want to digress, but Canada gets a bad rap sometime about their medical system there, and one would think that it's overcrowded, but you're saying it's much more civilized.
It's just very different. The US system has become completely insane, with massive burnout throughout the medical profession. And it's just gotten a little bit too insane for me. US physicians are trying to leave the field or leave the US by a boatload, and I was good enough and lucky enough to be able to do it. I was recruited back to Canada using the Distinguished Professor pathway, which is the pathway they use to recruit Nobel laureates and international scientific superstars.
So I want to rewind a little bit, or maybe further back. I mean, at what point did you develop this initial interest in hacking that sort of came full circle to what you did at Penn and what you're doing right now? Where was the initial interest in that?
Well, back before medical school, I won the Quebec Mathematics Olympiad in the early 1980s. And with the prize money, I bought my first computer, which was an Apple clone computer. I couldn't afford a real Apple computer. I then absorbed all the knowledge about computers like a sponge. And I learned to program by myself in about half a dozen computer languages, ranging from assembly to Pascal. I also started exploring BitNet at the time, just looking around this early version of the internet. And I was active in many online bulletin boards, and even ran one with a friend who was a quadriplegic. I was really motivated by massive curiosity, which is really my main motivation in all my endeavors. I was trying to get into different sites and to explore as much as I could of the world through my computer. There were no laws against it at the time, and of course, I was a minor, so I was pretty safe. But I always followed a strict code of conduct of not doing any harm to anyone, since I have been a very ethical hacker from the start. I also cracked, for fun, a lot of software to remove their protection, like games and stuff like that. There were no laws against that at the time. But eventually, the RCMP in Canada started looking into the practice, and the government was planning to come up with new laws, and I just stopped completely. I had just been admitted to medical school in Canada and did not want to get into trouble. So I kind of completely gave up hacking at the time. Well, maybe gave up 90% of hacking.
And the other 10%? Did you refocus in a different area, or did you just do it less time?
Less time, yeah.
So everybody has a different notion, especially now that I mean this cybersecurity is not just a word that people use. It's become the news item of the evening. So and there are all these aspects of it in terms of things like social engineering. I know that you've said that you didn't really do social engineering when you were doing it then. I mean, it's become very popular now. What are you seeing as from your professional opinion in all of the areas that you're in? What do you see as the nexus of social media and cybersecurity dangers these days?
Well, social media is very often an entry door for many hacking exploits. It is a tool in social engineering for gathering as much information as you can about an individual or a company and try to find out about what's going on, who works there, who does what, and then try to target specific high-level individuals. Not necessarily high-level in the company, but say somebody who's a computer admin with all the passwords and the access to the network. So you're trying to social engineer access to that person by finding as much as you can about that person through social networks. It's not something that I've often done myself, but it's something that's very, very common. It's a little bit like when you are inside a company and listening to conversations around the water fountain, but it's more covert. by just browsing the internet and looking at social media.
And I know you said you did explore some of the not necessarily the dark web, but some of the darker areas, something like the Tor network and things like that. Could you tell us a little bit about where people, whether white hat or the bad guys, where these people hang out and where is there a place where they share? I hate to call them best practices.
Well, there's many kinds of illicit stuff for many kinds of people. The dark web is mainly for the bad guys. There's a lot of bad information in there. I mean, anything bad that you can think of, like getting drugs, getting kiddie porn, getting fake diplomas, hiring a hitman, etc., etc. This is all on the dark web. When I initially found out about it, I looked around and it was simply not something that was appealing to me because I was not into any of that stuff. Never did drugs, don't even drink alcohol. There's a lot of information in there, and you can find a list of hacked passwords if you want to buy them. If a hospital is victim of a ransomware attack and criminals steal several terabytes of data on patient files, that information can be made available for purchase on the dark web. You can either buy it in bulk, like information about 90,000 patients, or buy it à la carte, like information about a specific patient who happens to be a prominent politician. You can find that on the dark web. It's very scary what you can find there. Hackers hung out at different places as the internet and social media evolved. In the old days, it was bulletin boards and internet relay chats. Now it's in places like Discord and the likes, and on the dark web.
So most of this is when you're learning how to do this. I mean, you have two different approaches. I mean, you can learn how to hack academically by just taking cybersecurity courses and things like that. And then you could learn just by an intuitive nature of just studying it. I mean, what's the learning curve? I mean, how did you, in terms of the most successful hacks that you did, legal, let's reinforce legal, what would you say the skill set was that you had to do that? Was it mostly from academic or is it from quote unquote on the hack training?
Well, before medical school, I mainly learned ad hoc from any source I could find, like from online bulletin boards. Later in life, when I decided to retool myself, I took a couple of certifications in cybersecurity like CEH, CISSP, OSCP. Gave me good practice and updated knowledge that I could build on top of my previous skill set. And so it was mainly an academic approach, which was more efficient than an ad hoc approach. This was a starting point, and I supplemented by specialized material gathered on the internet. The sky is the limit on what you can learn about hacking on the internet. So initially, formal training, formal certifications, and then went from there to retool myself ad hoc in areas that I needed.
So I think it's interesting from a personal point of view of how your son actually inspired you to get back into this after you had sort of grown up and went into your professional life. Could you tell our Health
Yeah,
Stealth Radio audience a little bit about how that reemergence came back?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. My son had started majoring in computer science in college, and he lacked the drive and motivation. And I wanted to help motivate him. And so I brought him to DEF CON in Las Vegas in 2017 to try to expose him to hackers. Young people like him who are very motivated and like to do computer stuff, hoping that some of the motivation and drive would rub off on him. For myself, during that week, I just wanted to attend a small evening session in cybersecurity and healthcare. That was in a small room, 30 chairs. I think it was on a Tuesday evening. So I get to that small room, and there were 500 people waiting in line at the door trying to get in. what the heck was going on. Fortunately, they moved us to a large room to fit everyone. And I learned that DEF CON 2017 took place just after worldwide attacks by the ransomware WannaCry and NotPetya, which dramatically transformed cybersecurity in healthcare into a very, very hot field. This is why there were 500 people at the door of that small room. And so the motivation of these young hackers at DEF CON did rub off, but it kind of rubbed off on me even more than on my son. And so I regained interest in the field and decided to retool my hacking skills by doing a few cyber certifications like CEH, CISSP, and OSCP. I also decided to connect with the leaders in cybersecurity in healthcare. The next conference I attended was the HIMSS Healthcare Cyber Forum in Boston, with all the top leaders in cybersecurity and healthcare. I connected with many of them, especially Richard Stainings, who's a guru in healthcare cybersecurity, and we've been giving many talks together over the years. And after retooling myself and connecting with these people, I started getting invited to speak at conferences and retreats and became part of the cyber leaders.
Fantastic.
One interesting thing I should mention is the importance of persistence. At that HIMSS Healthcare Cyber Forum, there was a fascinating evening session. It was a hacking simulation of an attack against a company, and they had invited all top cybersecurity leaders to participate. It was at the IBM X-Force Center in Cambridge. I really wanted to go, but I was just brand new, reacquainting myself with the field. I was not a leader yet, but I really wanted to go. So all day long, in between talks at a conference, I stopped at the IBM booth and I kept bugging them, telling them I really wanted to go. Can you give me tickets? Non-stop. And eventually, they got me tickets, and I participated in that simulation. And this is where I was able to connect with many of the healthcare cyber leaders. And it ended up being a really good move for me. So it's important. Persistent pays. When you want something that seems very small, keep at it until you get it. It might make a huge difference in the long term.
Voracious appetite. It's funny you mentioned the X-Force because I was on the board at HIMSS actually, and one of the things we did during one of those conferences was we took people over. We took a busload of people over to X-Force, and I have to say, I'm a cynic of a lot of these gimmicky things, but when I got there, I think it was one of the most amazing experiences that I've had in my surely in my healthcare IT career, because it reinforced the fact, and we could talk about this as a separate topic, it reinforced the fact that only so much of cybersecurity is the technological fix. That what the X-Force did was simulate the fact of what you did and what kind of stupid things people said after they were hacked, with a guy that had the television camera going on and the stock market ticker, and one wrong word, the stock goes down. So I just thought in fact, I was so infatuated with it that he was the head of the X-Force was one of my interviews a few months ago.
Was that in 2017? Because I think that's the time I went there.
It's hard to believe it was that far back, but I don't doubt that you're right. So we might have been in the same classroom together, which was, the feeling that when you get in there, it's multimedia, and it's not a small part technology, but it's not all technology. It's human communications errors is another big part of it.
Amazing that we're both in that same room at the same time, and we're just only finding out about it now. It was such a giant room filled with computer screens on all the walls. It was amazing. My role in the simulation was HR, handling the phone.
I like how they had the TV studio in the back where they were interviewing people and waiting for them to make a mistake. And I was one of those people. I just said something really stupid, and the next thing I know, they were playing it for the crowd. So going back to this, I mean, you consort with all of the different kinds of people that have been in the white hat business. You're surely, because of HIMSS and hopefully some of the work you could do in the future with CHUM, where I'm working right now. What are some of the silliest mistakes and one of the major vulnerabilities that could be easily solved that you see as you travel around and talk to people in these enterprises? What are the simple mistakes and lessons learned from them?
These days, most attacks start with a phishing email received by an employee, which allows cyber criminals to get through the hospital safety perimeter. They gather information, they install software on the hacked employee's computer, and they can eventually use it to break into the hospital network. One problem is that hospitals have become more and more open, with more and more employees working remotely, especially since the pandemic. So it's become more and more difficult to protect not only the hospital, but its numerous attachments, like all the employees working from home, as well as protect third-party vendors. The situation is getting worse and will continue to get worse because remote work will not stop. Remote employees might visit shady sites and download malware without knowing it. And then that malware can piggyback on the hospital connection whenever the remote employee connects to the hospital. So it's a big problem. Another area of weakness for hospitals is network segmentation. Once a hacker gets in through the external perimeter of the hospital, he can gain full access to the entire hospital network because there's no segmentation. By implementing network segmentation, they can still get in, but can only see a small part of the network. Another problem is that hospitals have tens of thousands of medical devices connected to the internet, and it's become very, very difficult to protect everything. Many hospitals can't even figure out the complete list of all the devices they have connected on their network. Another issue that is specific to hospitals is that very often you have to patch devices because of newly identified vulnerabilities, like in every other field. Some network medical devices are difficult to patch because they can be in constant use by patients. Take the example of a ventilator. Patient on a ventilator with COVID for an entire week, and then you find a network vulnerability on the ventilator. You can't say, well, let's bring down the ventilator to patch it, because we're going to kill the patient. We try to avoid that as much as possible. So there are vulnerabilities that you cannot patch because the devices are constantly in use. And that's where segmentation would help, because it would create a little firewall again around that specific unpatched device, preventing access to it.
In your white hat work, was there a remote device that seemed to be more vulnerable than others that you would test to say maybe I could get in through the watch or something like that? Or is that a silly notion?
Every device has its vulnerabilities. Cybersecurity researchers have hacked through pacemakers and insulin pumps and can trigger them to kill patients. Infusion pumps are often networked, and they're used to inject medications in patients. If you hack that, it can create a lot of problems. Any device like an air conditioning system might be an entry point to a hospital network. You might have heard that there was a casino in Las Vegas that got hacked, and the entry point was a computer system controlling a fish tank. Hackers can get really creative.
So yeah, I mean, you obviously, I mean, you have this portfolio life and this convergence of cybersecurity and AI, amongst other things. So what do you think about this arms race that's happening because of AI with the bad guys? And surely the white hat people are looking for AI protection and new techniques for doing that to prevent it. How do you think this is going to explode in terms of AI generated hacking let's call it generative hacking at the same time?
AI is transforming healthcare very rapidly, especially my field of radiology, which is very computer intensive and is a perfect environment for AI. I've talked about the interface of AI and cybersecurity and healthcare at conferences for many years. I'm even talking about that at RSNA in December, the big radiology conference. AI can be used for both offensive and defensive aspects of cybersecurity. From an offensive point of view, a big issue is that it makes non-specialists with limited hacking skills very dangerous. They're not expert coders or even hackers. They just essentially use the AI software. So this will dramatically increase the pool of attackers. Now, from a defensive point of view, AI will help the speed of detection of intrusions and attacks. As you know, a hacker takes on average like 5 hours to get all the important data after he breaks into your company's network. 5 hours! Very often, the break-ins are not even detected for months. On average, it's like 280 something days. By the time you detect it, the hacker is long gone. So AI could be used to supplement and eventually replace humans for defensive purposes. It could, for example, detect intrusions instantly while the humans are sleeping at night. AI is used more and more for very creative attacks. You've certainly heard about deepfake videos. Recently in Hong Kong, there was an incredible hack involving deepfakes. They extorted $25 million by creating a web meeting involving the top leaders in a company, as well as one person in billing. The goal was to convince the billing person to send a $25 million wire to another company. All the top leaders were there in that web meeting, but they had all been replaced by deepfake videos. None of them were real. And so that billing person sent the $25 million wire because she was convinced by the deepfakes. This is pretty insane, but gives you an idea of what's coming. Another issue is that attackers have a huge edge over defenders, because an attacker only needs one successful attack out of 1,000 tries to break into a system. But if the defender needs to block all the attacks, because if a single one gets through, then the company gets hacked. So in the AI arms race, attackers still have the edge.
You had mentioned burnout earlier, so this is what in the other research that we're doing with the CISOs, the Chief Information Security Officer, the burnout rate in that category is so high because it's not like we're going to take off the weekend because the bad guys are going to be out for the weekend as well. So it's creating a whole problem. How about the imagery is been renowned for being way ahead of the AI game. You said it was, I forget when your career started, but you said you were doing it 20 years ago at least. So for some of the guys, the radiologists and the imagery people, they look at this as sort of like we've been doing this for a while. It's just gotten more intense. Have you seen in your profession, have there been areas where radiology has been hacked, or the cybersecurity aspects of that, making it more prone and causing a massive, I mean, the damage that can be done is not just personal information, but it's also incorrect diagnosis.
Radiology is special because it deals a lot with computers and machines hooked up to computers. And computers can get hacked. As part of my bi-weekly hacking exercises at Penn Medicine, one of those exercises was to try to hack into a test PACS system. PACS is essentially the system that radiologists use to store and read images. I was able to hack into it by inserting PHP code into the header of a DICOM image file, which is the format for medical images. I was able to upload the image into the PACS server, and I was able to trigger a remote command execution, taking over the full system. There are many such kinds of vulnerabilities in medical imaging systems. A few years ago, I looked seriously into the problem of cybersecurity of medical images. I created a Blue Ribbon team made up of the two leaders of the DICOM security workgroup, as well as a few hackers and cybersecurity researchers with published exploits on medical images. And we identified many vulnerabilities. We published our results in the radiology literature, and I gave many talks on the topic. The DICOM standard has several security features like encryption and digital signatures to protect medical images. But most vendors have not implemented them, or when they have implemented them, they are rarely used. Why is that? Because there's a lack of practical management of keys and certificates, which are used for encryption and digital signatures. Recently, the DICOM leaders have been looking into different frameworks to help manage keys. Another issue related to radiology that made the news a couple of years ago is that several cybersecurity teams found that many DICOM image servers were openly exposed on the internet. They were able to steal images from these exposed servers and even reconstruct three-dimensional patient anatomy. This was highly publicized in the media. Companies with exposed servers were contacted and given advice on how to secure their systems. 6 months later, the same cybersecurity teams did internet searches for exposed DICOM servers to see whether the companies with previously exposed servers had finally protected their system. Surprisingly, they found even more exposed systems. So the situation had actually worsened.
Very interesting. I'd just like to take a moment and thank our viewers and our listeners. This is Health Stealth Radio. I'm proud to have Benoit Desjardins, who's speaking today on hacking and his experience with AI and cybersecurity. Benoit, just a couple of questions. I want to be sensitive to your time. I can't stop listening, to be honest with you. Everybody's talking about Change Healthcare, Ascension, what happened there, and I want to tie another question into that. To what extent does the government need to get more involved in cybersecurity? Is that an intrusion, or is that a mandate that's required? So first on Change and Ascension and what you observed, and secondly, where can the governments get involved?
So these two hacks are very interesting. They're ransomware attacks, essentially, and I believe are a prelude for what is to come more and more frequently in the future. Now, Change Healthcare is really a firm that performs critical functions in the US healthcare system, like authorizing coverage, processing claims, processing drug prescriptions. They are not a hospital. They just handle the mundane stuff for many hospitals. This has a huge impact nationally. It affects about a third of all such transactions in the US. So it's a too big to fail mega corporation. Well, it got hacked back in February by ransomware attacks from the Black Cat team. They used compromised user credentials. This really disrupted all operations, and they stole 4 terabytes of sensitive data. It's considered the most significant cyber attack on the US healthcare system ever. And nearly 94% of hospitals in the country have experienced financial repercussions from the cyber attack. Let me repeat that. Nearly 94% of hospitals in the US have experienced financial repercussions from this single cyber attack. And this attack is really jeopardizing the survival of countless healthcare providers nationwide due to delays in patient care reimbursement. That could lead to many bankruptcies down the line.
I'd just like to add to that there were instances where companies that weren't in healthcare weren't able to print checks to pay people on paper checks because it was all tied in to the same ecosystem.
Yeah, many different companies were affected. Now for the Ascension hack. Ascension is really one of the largest healthcare systems in the United States. They have like 140 hospitals across 19 states. And they were disrupted last month by a ransomware attack. It affected their electronic healthcare systems, phone capabilities, and everything's been offline. They had to go back to manual and paper-based processes. This is just your typical ransomware attack. The problem is that the scale of their network of affected hospitals is just massive. Instead of having one hospital being attacked, we're dealing with something that attacks 140 hospitals at the same time. With these ever-growing networks of hospitals all over the country, once a hacker gets into one of the hospitals, they can often get through the entire network of hospitals and affect dozens and sometimes hundreds of hospitals. This is going on more and more frequently as hospitals are merging all over the place, and you get more and more of these mega networks. As for government, well, government is necessary to help hospitals defend themselves. The problem right now is that the US is a society of blame. It's really the most extreme society of blame on the entire planet. One solution to the problem of ransomware and cyber attacks is to stop punishing the victims of cybercrime. Because right now, when you have a hospital that's victim of cybercrime, they are faced with huge fines from the government just for being victim of a cyber attack. And that's followed by tons of class action lawsuits from greedy lawyers, which diverts valuable resources away from protection and from patient care. Just look at the Chance healthcare attack. There were dozens and dozens of class action suits filed by greedy lawyers. Because that's the nature of the US legal system. They're like sharks, essentially. So they see a victim bleeding and they say, let's just finish it. Cybercrime right now is really one of the two elements that's currently destroying the US healthcare system. The other element being, of course, the US medical legal system. When the government punishes the victims of cybercrime instead of the perpetrators, there's no incentive for perpetrators to stop hacking hospitals. And if you have an army of hackers from a nation state like Russia or North Korea trying to get into your systems, they will get in, no matter how much protections your institution has. Even if you have the best hospital and the biggest cybersecurity team, they will get in because they have an army of hackers who are trying a bunch of stuff nonstop until they get through the hospital perimeter. The federal government needs to understand the situation. And one of the problems is that when you blame the victims, it makes the victim hesitate to rapidly share the information about the intrusions and warn other institutions about it. Many institutions victims of cyber attacks will go bankrupt in the next few years after a cyber attack. So US hospitals will continue to fall like dominoes. I work very closely with many organizations, and one of them is the HSCC, the Health Sector Coordinating Council. Great organization, semi-government, semi-private. And the goal is to help medical institutions to protect themselves from cyber attacks as much as possible, and we provide tools and knowledge to help them. Let's face it, at Penn Medicine, we had a huge cyber team to protect Penn Medicine. But if you look at a small hospital or a small clinic, they just don't have the same cyber manpower or cyber resources, especially in the rural hospitals. They have one IT guy who handles the repair of all the computers in the institution and handles cybersecurity without having ever been trained in that field. This guy is no match against an army of hackers from North Korea. So small hospitals need to be helped, not punished, if they are a victim of a cyber attack.
Is Canada any different?
Well, Canada does not have as many cyber attacks as the US, but it has some. Canada has a government-run system, often has government tools that are provincial-wide. And so it's not just a bunch of different small clinics and small hospitals, each trying to defend themselves. There are a lot of government elements. For example, when I started in Quebec doing radiology, I realized that at my hospital, we have access to all prior imaging performed for all patients in all hospitals in Quebec. So if the prior exam was done at some rural hospital somewhere in northern Quebec, I have access to it. And so that's really incredibly good medicine.
Almost un-American here.
Well, you can do that in the US. In Philadelphia, when a patient had a prior exam at Jefferson, which is a competitor, and was coming for a follow-up imaging exam at Penn, we had no idea what they had seen on imaging at Jefferson, unless they provided us with a CD containing the outside images. Whereas in Quebec, when I read a case, I have access to everything ever done in the province. And these systems are sometimes protected at the government level.
It's a government infrastructure situation as opposed to an individual.
Exactly. They are not invulnerable.
No, nobody is, but at
Right.
least there's critical mass. Just the last question. I want to be respectful of your time. You teach and you run into a lot of medical students, and I'm always curious because of the work that I do on burnout, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, patient experience. Where do you think, from a technological point of view, maybe not just technological, but where do you feel the shortfalls are in medical education right now? From a personal branding point of view, we're creating these brands called an MD. What do you think is really needed more than ever as they build their brands that people just don't think of? You have a very, like I said, you have a very compelling and interesting and complicated brand in a good way. What do you advise your students?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have never put any efforts on personal branding. I mean, I've achieved a lot, and I've become a world leader and expert in 3 different fields. But I just list what I've achieved in my curriculum vitae, as is expected when you're working in academia. I have never been motivated by fame. I just want to help and have an impact on the world in the 3 fields I'm an expert in. There's many things about me that I don't necessarily publicize. One of those things that makes me truly unique, and that very few people know, is that every 5 years or so, I undertake, outside work, what I call a new grand challenge. I give myself 5 years to become a top expert in a brand new field in which I've never worked and in which I know nothing about. I just start from scratch. This has included many fields, like becoming black belt at Taekwondo, becoming a Boy Scout leader, becoming a pilot, becoming a master marksman, and my current grand challenge is to become a top drone racing pilot. And so this is kind of my brand, but I don't really publicize it. It's just stuff that I do. What I publicize is more related to my formal work. My recommendation to your students is to follow your interests and your skill sets and just list your real skills online. Don't become a fake personality. Try to stay 100% genuine all the time. I know it's very, very difficult, but try to, and it's going to pay off at some point.
Well, I think what you and I share, looking at my sort of checkered background as well, because this was a very long and twisting road to get where I am tonight to talk with you, is that you have to have this voracious appetite for lifelong learning. So that's, I mean, that's what drives both of us, I think, that you and also always looking for something that's going to take you a little bit, or in the case of drone racing, far out of your comfort zone,
Yes.
which really is the opiate that really excites us, and I think that's where you and I, by the fact that I'm sitting here as the moderator of a show called Health Stealth Radio, I have no reason for being here professionally, but the journey has taken me here, just like the journey's taking you, and we meet like this, and it's the extreme honor to be able to talk with you tonight about your accomplishments and your advice for the people out there in cybersecurity world.
That was great. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for taking the time.
We'll keep this going, I assure you.
Excellent.